Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are going to be continuing, as ever, to read The Sleeper Awakes by H.G. Wells. So, let's get going. Graham rubbed his chin. The man with the flaxen beard came back towards them, turned suddenly, listened for a moment, lifted his eyebrows at the older man, and hurried off through the archway towards the balcony. The tumult of shouting grew louder, and the thick-set man turned and listened also. He cursed suddenly under his breath, and turned his eyes upon Graham with an unfriendly expression. It was a surge of many voices, rising and falling, shouting and screaming, and once came a sound like blows and sharp cries, and then a snapping like a crackling of dry sticks. Graham strained his ears to draw some single thread of sound from the woven tumult. Then he perceived, repeated again and again, a certain formula. For a time he doubted his ears, but surely these were the words. "Show us the sleeper, show us the sleeper." The thick-set man rushed suddenly to the archway. "Wild," he cried. "How do they know? Do they know, or is it guessing?" There was perhaps an answer. "I can't come," said the thick-set man. "I have him to see to, but shout from the balcony." There was an inaudible reply. "Say he is not awake. Anything. I leave it to you." He came hurrying back to Graham. "You must have clothes at once," he said. "You cannot stop here, and it will be impossible to—" He rushed away, Graham shouting unanswered questions after him. In a moment he was back. "I can't tell you what is happening. It is too complex to explain. In a moment you shall have your clothes made. Yes, in a moment. And then I can take you away from here. You will find out our troubles soon enough." But those voices, they were shouting. Something about the sleeper. That's you. They have some twisted idea. I don't know what it is. I know nothing. A shrill bell jetted acutely across the indistinct mingling of remote noises, and this brusque person sprang to a little group of appliances in the corner of the room. He listened for a moment, regarding a ball of crystal, nodded, and said a few indistinct words. Then he walked to the wall through which the two men had vanished. It rolled up again like a curtain, and he stood waiting. Graham lifted his arm and was astonished to find what strength the restoratives had given him. He thrust one leg over the side of the couch, and then the other. His head no longer swam. He could scarcely credit his rapid recovery. He sat, feeling his limbs. The man with the flaxen beard re-entered from the archway, and as he did so the cage of a lift came sliding down in front of the thick-set man, and a lean, grey-bearded man, carrying a roll, and wearing a tightly fitting costume of dark green, appeared therein. "This is the tailor," said the thick-set man, with an introductory gesture. "It will never do for you to wear that black. I cannot understand how it got here. But I shall. You will be as rapid as possible," he said to the tailor. The man in green bowed, and, advancing, seated himself by Graham on the bed. His manner was calm, but his eyes were full of curiosity. "You will find the fashions altered, sire," he said. He glanced from under his brows at the thick-set man. He opened the roller with a quick movement, and a confusion of brilliant fabrics poured out over his knees. "You lived, sire, in a period essentially cylindrical, the Victorian, with a tendency to the hemisphere in hats. Circular curves always. Now," he flicked out a little appliance the size and appearance of a keyless watch, whirled the knob, and behold, a little figure in white appeared, kinetoscope fashion, on the dial, walking and turning. The tailor caught up a pattern of bluish-white satin. "This is my conception of your immediate treatment," he said. The thick-set man came and stood by the shoulder of Graham. "We have very little time," he said. "Trust me," said the tailor. "My machine follows. What do you think of this?" "What is that?" asked the man from the 19th century. In your days they showed you a fashion plate, said the tailor, but this is our modern development. See here. The little figure repeated its evolutions, but in a different costume. Or this, and with a click, another small figure in a more voluminous type... I can't pronounce that one. I know the word, I just can't pronounce that. Voluminous type of robe marched onto the dial. The tailor was very quick in his movements, and glanced twice towards the lift as he did these things. It rumbled again, and a crop-haired, anemic lad with features of the Chinese type, clad in a coarse pale-blue canvas, appeared together with a complicated machine, which he pushed noiselessly on little casters into the room. Incontinently the little kinetoscope was dropped. Graham was invited to stand in front of the machine, and the tailor muttered some instructions to the crop-haired lad, who answered it in guttural tones and with words Graham did not recognise. The boy then went to conduct an incomprehensible monologue in the corner, and the tailor pulled out a number of slotted arms, terminating in little discs, pulling them out until the discs were flat against the body of Graham, one at each shoulder blade, one at the elbows, one at the neck, and so forth, so that at last there were perhaps 200 of them upon his body and limbs. At the same time, some other person entered the room by the lift, behind Graham. The tailor set moving a mechanism that initiated a faint-sounding rhythmic movement of parts in the machine. And in another movement, he was knocking up the levers and Graham was released. The tailor replaced his cloak of black, and the man with the flaxen beard proffered him a little glass of some refreshing fluid. Graham saw over the rim of the glass a pale-faced young man regarding him with a singular fixity. The thick-set man had been pacing the room fretfully, and now turned and went through the archway towards the balcony, from which the noise of a distant crowd still came in gusts and cadences. The crop-haired lad handed the tailor a roll of the bluish satin, and the two began fixing this in the mechanism in a manner reminiscent of a roll of paper in a 19th-century printing machine. Then they ran the entire thing on its easy, noiseless bearings across the room, to a remote corner where a twisted cable looped rather gracefully from the wall. They made some connection, and the machine became energetic and swift. "What is that doing?" asked Graham, pointing with the empty glass to the busy figures, and trying to ignore the scrutiny of the newcomer. "Is that some sort of force laid on?" "Yes," said the man with the flaxen beard. "Who is that?" He indicated the archway behind him. The man in purple stroked his little beard, hesitated, and answered in an undertone. "He is Howard, your chief guardian. You see, sire, it's a little difficult to explain. The council appoints a guardian and assistants. This hall has, under certain restrictions, been public, in order that people might satisfy themselves. We have barred the doorways for the first time, but I think, if you don't mind, I will leave him to explain." "Odd," said Graham. "Guardian? Council?" Then turning his back on the newcomer, he asked in an undertone, "Why is this man glaring at me? Is he a mesmerist?" "Mesmerist? He is a capillotomist." I don't know that word at all. "Capillotomist? Yes, one of the chief. His yearly fee is 6 lions. It sounded sheer nonsense. Graham snatched at the last phrase with an unsteady mind. 6 lions, he said. "Didn't you have lions?" "I suppose not. You had the old pounds. They are our monetary units." "But what was that you said? 6 does?" "Yes, 6 dozen, sire. Of course things, even these little things, have altered. You lived in the days of the decimal system, the Arab system, tens and little hundreds and thousands. We have 11 numerals now. We have single figures for both 10 and 11. 2 figures for a dozen, and a dozen makes a gross, and a great hundred, you know. A dozen gross a dozand, and a dozen a myriad. Very simple. My God, that is confusing." "I suppose so," said Graham. "But about this cap, what was it?" The man with the flaxen beard glanced over his shoulder. "Here are your clothes," he said. Graham turned round sharply and saw the tailor standing at his elbow, smiling, and holding some palpably new garments over his arm. The crop-headed boy, by means of one wringer, was impelling the complicated machine towards the lift by which he had arrived. Graham stared at the completed suit. "You don't mean to say—" "Just made," said the tailor. He dropped the garments at the feet of Graham, walked to the bed on which Graham had so recently been lying, flung out the translucent mattress, and turned up the looking-glass. As he did so, a furious bell summoned the thick-set man to the corner. The man with the flaxen beard rushed across to him, and then hurried out by the archway. And with that, I've once again lost track of time a little bit. So we are going to be ending the episode there, and I will say thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.